Welcome to The Memory Game, a podcast where I, Nathan Tuffin,
and I, Rob Beer, exchange voice notes as we carry out the important work of recording an emotional history of video games
for the betterment of future generations. This week, Rob asks a question about the choices we always make in games.
Hey there, Scary Door. I awoke this morning, as I do every day, to the rattled cry of magpies seeping through the double glazing and the louder, peculiar imitated call that my cat issues in response. I'm not sure whether he sees them as family or as foes, but until the day he drags one through the cat flap as an offering, I'm not going to pass judgment. I drew the curtains to find him sat proudly on the throne of his windowsill, peering down at his own sick, again. And nestled within it, on a piece of fine hand-pressed parchment, was a question about video games. You see what's happening, Nath? A game of escalation where we get increasingly elaborate about our tiny intros, and I won't rest until we're writing 45-minute sagas that are the prelude to the very notion that I have a question each time. What led to this one was me thinking about that idea that you can buy and listen to cassette tapes in Shenmue, and how when you mentioned in the research notes that to listen to them, you couldn't have them as the background music. You had to just stop and play through the tapes, which is something that absolutely makes it less appealing to do. That got me thinking about the idea of how many things and features in games are entirely optional. And so my question is, what are the optional elements in games that you always choose to do? I was thinking about this great Twitter feed that used to exist, I don't know if it still exists, of just checking whether you can flush a toilet in games. And so it's just any game that's ever existed and just a sequence or like a little film clip of whether you can flush the toilet or not. And I guess that stemmed from someone always wanting to flush a toilet if they can. When trying to find my answers to that question, I ended up not being able to think of loads. So I'm going to pivot. My real question, the question underneath the question is, what are the choices that you always make in games? Essentially, what are Nathan Tuffin's default settings? My first wave of thoughts around that was about always choosing the good path. Obviously, there's games that I've replayed, having done the initial campaign, and tried to find out what the bad choices involve. But just any given opportunity, I play the good scout, I try and get the head teacher's award business. A memorable example of this would be a game like Fable, which has lots of branching choices for you to make. One that I remember is there's a lady that's looking for a husband, and you have to go and find out what's happened to him, and it turns out he's having an affair. So you can either choose to tell her that he's having an affair, or you can do what he's asked you to do, which is to tell her that he's dead. And so, neither of those choices, it's not apparent how each of them will play out. So you can, I guess in that one, the honest thing to do would be to tell her the truth, but then that's not kind because I think she ends up killing herself, and then so that's a bad choice, and it ends up marking you. And it's one of those, I still think the moral choice is telling the truth there, but the game reads it one way or the other. It's the sort of thing that you might try and reload and try and get the good points, because often the perks that are given to you for doing something, in quote marks, good in a game are more powerful than the perks for doing a bad thing. That's true in Bioshock. You can, in the original Bioshock, you can either try and save the little sisters, who are the backstory isn't ever fully explained. It's sketched at in a way that's very intriguing and haunting. You can either save them, where you lift them up into these little holes, or you can harvest them for their Adam, which is the thing that explains the supernatural science elements in the games. Choosing the bad choice, I did it once and it did not make me feel good, because it's very suggestive. It's like Psycho. You don't see anything necessarily horrific, but it's suggestive in a way, that your hand goes towards them and then it dips to black or something. There's glowing lights, and it's like Psycho. You never see the knife go into the woman, but it creates that space for you to imagine something absolutely horrible happening. And I stuck with me in a way that I'm not happy about. So yeah, always go for the good choice. That's my default, I think. Another choice that I'll always go for in games is calling my character Ober Anderson. It stems from when I first tried to set up my Xbox 360 profile, not like an online account, just the normal version. I managed to mistype my name, Rob, as Ober, which is amazing in that it's a 3-letter word and it's every letter in the wrong place. And I don't know, it was vaguely like, oh, I quite like that, I'm going to stick with it. So that was like, whenever we watched a DVD, you had to log in as Ober. And then that sort of spanned out into being Ober Anderson is in my mind, my sort of Swedish alter ego. And the fact that they're Swedish comes back to me playing ice hockey games as a kid, and there not being Great Britain, or Great Britain being rubbish, and choosing Sweden as the team that I supported. And I think that's because they were either in the final or in a semi-final of the 1992 or 1996 Winter Olympics. And I managed to watch that game, and it was a shootout, which is my favourite thing in ice hockey games. The way they do penalties isn't just a free shot. You skate with the puck from the halfway line, and it's like a one-on-one with the goalkeeper. And I just thought that was like the best way of doing a penalty. I think Sweden won that shootout, and from then I had like a little place for Sweden in my heart. And then the other thing that I was thinking about was, so not just naming of character, but the choices I'll make for a character wherever possible. And a theme that I'd spotted when trying to think about this stuff was that I'll often end up trying to be an engineer if I can. So my favourite class when playing Team Fortress 2 was an engineer. When I played Overwatch, there was that Schwarden, is that his name? Can't remember what his name is. There's a sort of dwarf that's got this turret. My turret! And he's been negged in a way that means he's not as enjoyable to play as he once was. But the simplicity of what you had to do there, which is like set up a gun and hit it with a hammer to fix it, which is, what engineering mostly is, as far as I can tell, is hitting things with hammers. And I come from a family with loads of engineers. So my sister did engineering at uni, my dad did computing, my cousin's an engineer, his wife's an engineer, my granddad worked for the National Grid as an engineer, and I don't do that. But I can hit things with hammers. And the game that I thought about that sort of set that as a pattern for me was, I was remembering in Guns of Icarus, my favourite part of that game was playing as an engineer. So that's a game we both played, but I'll try and explain it to our listeners. It's a game set on flying ships, so they look like sail ship, pirate ships type thing, but without needing to explain why they're able to fly. And so when you load it in, you could have 3 or 4 of you on the same ship. One of you could be a pilot, one could be a shooter, gunner, not a shooter. And I think the other one was an engineer. And so the ships would be piloted around this map, and you just had to try and blow up the enemy or whatever. And so one of you, as I say, was sort of sailing. One of you had a special perk when they were shooting, so the guns were slightly more powerful. And then the engineer had a perk when they tried to fix the guns. I think you could superpower the guns by hitting them with a hammer, and you could also, as an engineer, you could fix the things more quickly if they were broken. But it was great because there were these light, small sail ships on multiple levels. And there were multiple layers to the ship, and you had to fly around. Like if you needed to shoot out the left-hand side, that meant you had to literally run to the gun turrets at the hand side and shoot them. So there's a lot about communicating with the pilot about what they were going to do, and then also shouting like, "Go and get that gun, because then we'll swing right, and that needs fixing." And so it had a lovely collaboration element to it. And when I think of it, the 2 main things I think of are the buzz of being able to like superpower that one of the guns by hitting it with a spanner over and over again, and using that that's just enough to like knock the other ship out, because it was obviously took a lot of shooting to bring down these big ships. And the other thing that I think about is continually lagging over the side of the ship because it didn't have like safe rails. It wanted to encourage you to jump between the sections, and going up the ladders and moving between those layers was fairly precarious. And my computer that I was playing on it was pants, so I was just continually falling off the edge of the side of the ship and then having to wait 30 seconds. And by the time I'd respawned, the ship was minutes away from being in a position to do anything again. So not all of those experiences are great, but the memories, the highs were high. Oh boy, they were high. So yeah, looking forward to hearing your answers, and hit me up.
Mr. Ober-Anderson. Thank you for that delicious cat-sick intro, buddy. I'm excited to try to best it in our next episode and continue the cycle until we overdo that feature and then have to put it to bed, inevitably. I love this question, but I am a tiny bit worried I've let you down here, as you've sort of left it to me to fill in a bit more about optional choices we always make in games, like the toilet flush you mentioned. But I so enjoyed the sort of paths or choices you laid out that you always take that I really wanted to comment on that and share my own versions. So my answers do sort of mirror yours quite closely, unfortunately. So, like you, I almost always walk the righteous path in games if there is a choice between good and evil. Or certainly I think that's where I've ended up a lot more in the past few years. And I remember when I was younger probably being a bit more experimental and maybe shifting back and forth a bit between the good and bad choices. But I think that was actually more to do with wanting to test what a game could do rather than about choosing right and wrong or sort of role-playing a character with some sort of moral agency. But either way, now it is all just goody two-shoes business all the time. And that story you told about harvesting little sisters in Bioshock, I'll never do anything bad in games ever again after hearing that story. That image of doing this sort of horrible deed but the camera not showing what's going on and leaving it up to your imagination, that's almost obscene. And I think that's made me feel as haunted as if I'd played the games. And as you mentioned the other day, I have avoided those games because they're so scary. So thank you for bringing me into that experience. Actually, that's not entirely true. I did play through Bioshock Infinite, which I managed to get through, I think mainly because it's in daylight and it's a bit sort of more fun and upbeat, though it does get scary near the end, but I just sort of persevered because I wanted to know what would happen. So like you, when I first play a game, a part of me thinks, yep, okay, I'll be the good guy first, and then if I ever play it again, I'll try and play as the bad guy. But that literally never happens. I can't think of one situation where I've done that. And if I do play through games again, I often just end up making the same choices over again, which is, probably a waste, but it's just sort of how I'm built, I think. And that's also the case for games where there are sort of various choices to be made, but no real system within the game of calculating or rewarding good and bad choices. So like in GTA 4...
Grand Theft Auto. Better luck next time!
Which I know I've mentioned many times now, and I've talked about as having played through probably 7 or 8 times over the course of, since it's been released. And I experimented for the first few times playing that game, probably to see all the different outcomes. But now, when I play through it, maybe the last 3 or 4 times, I always make the same choices, and they are always what I think is the right thing to do, even though that is a bit murky in places within the narrative of the game. And the only exception to that is the choice of the final mission. And this is some spoilers for the end of GTA 4, so skip on for a minute or so if for some insane reason you still plan on playing that 16-year-old game to the end. So at the end of GTA 4, you can either get revenge on the Russian mobster Dmitry Raskolov, who sort of hounded you for the whole game, or you can, put that aside and try to just make a big pile of money for you and your cousin. I think probably the right thing to do isn't to seek revenge, and the whole narrative of the game sort of steers you into this message that revenge is fruitless and unsatisfying, and ultimately it just creates more problems. And that, one of the richnesses, part of the richness of that game is the sort of journey your character goes on, seeking revenge and trying to make himself feel better with it. But basically, if you choose to avoid revenge and go for the money, I think your character seems to be, Nico seems to be a bit happier, but then the outcome is that your cousin Roman dies. And if you do take revenge, all that really happens is your sort of work associate sister dies, which, obviously both are sad, but you grow to love Roman. And, I don't like to think of a world after the game where Nico's living on without his goofy cousin. So from now on, whenever I play it, I just always choose revenge. Keep Roman alive, that's what I say. Taking the sort of good path, the righteous path, or being a sort of good guy is something I always think about a lot in games of Dungeons and Dragons that I've played. And I think in all of the games I've played in, my characters have often ended up just being these quite sort of bland goodies. And they always just do the right thing. They're quite vanilla and nice, and I can't quite work out why that is. When I run games of D&D, when I DM them, I'm able to come up with these sort of quite fun, complex characters that keep the player guessing, and I feel like I play them quite well, and I'm able to play, baddies and goodies and, all in between. But it's like when I'm playing a character in someone else's game, the stakes are too high, or I'm sort of worried about what role-playing as a baddie, or even someone who might just occasionally be a bit mean, what that would mean for me in real life. And that sort of led me to my first counter question, which is, what do you think it is that sort of compels you to be the good guy in games, or to take the sort of the good path, other than, just being a real-life stand-up good guy? Your haunting story from Bioshock and how games might reward moral decisions reminded me of a particular experience in Red Dead Redemption 2, which forced the developers into making a sort of complex judgment on what's right and wrong. And, having a moral barometer always felt like a slightly unusual choice to me in the Red Dead games, especially considering they're made by Rockstar and they come very much from that same mould as GTA. But where GTA basically allows you to be a mindless sociopath, Red Dead makes this sort of moral judgment on many of your actions and then sort of rewards or removes honour. I think that's the system accordingly. And usually that is pretty straightforward. If you hog-tie an innocent shopkeeper with your lasso and then hurl him to some hungry crocodiles, the game's going to remove some honour from you. But if you save someone from bandits and, return their belongings to them, it rewards you with a small amount of honour. But there is this one bit specifically that I think is less simple than that. Or so, there might be more, but this is one that I really remember. So in both Red Dead games, you get these strangers and people of interest that you come across as you're exploring the Wild West. And in Red Dead 2, in one of the towns, you meet this sort of old, down-on-his-luck gentleman. He's very sad. He's quite sympathetic, really, when you first meet him. And he tells you that he lost everything, his business, his home, his family, and he asks you to return to his old house and collect some items of sentimental value to him. But when you go there to this, I think it's his old business or his old home, it becomes clear that this man was actually a slave merchant, and he profited from buying and selling slaves. And as you explore his home, you realise he kept slaves imprisoned in awful conditions, and it's quite sort of an unsettling scene. And the reason, obviously, this man is down on his luck is because slavery's been abolished, and now he doesn't have a business, or a kind of calling anymore. So when you return to this slaver, your character, Arthur Morgan, is disgusted by him, and you have this cutscene where they have an argument, and this slave is completely unrepentant, and in the end, you just sort of, in a rage, throw his last few treasured possessions that you've recovered into a campfire, and it upsets him immensely. And, one of the items you've recovered from his home, I think, is this old antique pistol, which he tries to shoot at you, but it fails, it doesn't shoot properly. The conversation ends, and you go back to the game with the slaver sort of weeping and broken because he's got absolutely nothing left. And in the moment in the game, I decided not to kill him after that interaction, just because it seemed like, right, this guy's already suffering, why get more blood on your hands? I'm just going to leave. So I started to walk off, but then I realised that he was sat hilariously close to his campfire, and I knew that if I shot him from a particular angle, he would fall into the campfire and catch light. And the temptation to do that was just too much. So I crept up and I shot him from behind and he tumbled into the fire. But interestingly, the game rewarded me some honour for doing that, even though I had executed an unarmed man who was clearly no threat to me anymore, probably no threat to anyone. But and if you shoot at any other unarmed person in that game, it removes honour from you. But in this instance, the developers decided, okay, this person has done something horrible, they deserve to die, and you're rewarded. And apparently, I did look it up, you're also rewarded for sparing him, but I think that's still quite a decision to make that the developers had to come to. So I told this story to TS, who is a good friend and work colleague of mine, and he doesn't really play video games beyond a bit of Mario Kart with his kids, and I just don't think he gets what all the fuss is about, really. So at lunch one day, I was trying to get across things about games that I love and, why they can be sort of interesting, and I told him this story from Red Dead in a kind of, look at the complex moral issues video games might try and tackle, look at the kind of stuff that can come up. And he was interested, he was very polite, and he listened. But at the end, I said something like, so what do you think was the right way for the developers to go with this? Do you think it's acceptable to reward the character for shooting this unarmed person, even though, they've done something evil? And he said, he thought for a second and then said, well, I don't think it's acceptable to shoot anyone. Which of course cut through the entire thing, because as nuanced as that situation might seem, really that game is an absolute slaughterfest. where you end up shooting thousands of people. And to a person that doesn't play video games, forcing this kind of system of measuring the moral value of your actions, it probably seemed quite farcical. On to the second types of path you always choose. I love that your creator characters are always called Ober Anderson, and how that also links into your love of the Swedish ice hockey team, and also just that it came from an accident. But that it feels like that kind of enriches the character, the idea of this person you have, and maybe that feeds into the way you play as him when you create him. But that also led me to my second counter question, which is, what does Ober look like? You've mentioned how the sort of generic Meebo type character for the Switch happens to look exactly like you. So I'm wondering if Ober is a good excuse for you to make someone that's like a bit unusual looking or just different looking. Maybe like, is he like a big sort of blonde, burly Swede? Has he got a droopy blonde moustache or even like a Viking braid? I think that's what I'm picturing. So I'd be interested to know. So I also have a creator character that I always used to make for years and years, and his name is Panswago, and I originally created him in a game called Coke Music. And there's a bit of background, because I think this might actually be a bit of a niche game reference. Coke Music was created by the same people who made Habbo Hotel, which was this online browser-based game from the early 2000s. And it was basically a chat room, I think, with this isometric view, really simple graphics. You played as these little cartoonish people, and you could go to different locations and chat with people, and also you owned a little apartment and you kitted it out with furniture. And I think that was it, basically. And Coke Music was exactly what it sounds like. It was a Coca-Cola sponsored version of Habbo Hotel, where everything was branded and red. And the only difference I remember was other than the sort of Coke themed products everywhere, was that you could mix 4 or 5 different songs together. Not all at once, but you had the choices of 4 or 5 different songs to mix. And then you could play them to the rest of the people in whatever area you were in, and get upvotes or whatever it was, likes. And then that sort of earned you in-game money to buy Coke-themed furniture with. And I played it with my friend Tom during the sort of MSN Messenger era of my life. And Panswago was the character on the second account I set up, so I could give my first character more credits and furniture and stuff like that. And I have no memory of where the name came from, but I think because I was being sort of sneaky in setting up extra accounts, I made him sort of swarthy and dark-haired with a pencil moustache. I didn't have to make him as anything. I just wanted to get his credits and stuff. But I kind of ended up making him look like this kind of, I don't know, like a Lothario character maybe. And we sort of imagined a personality for him through the course of playing the game. And then in the end, I would occasionally play as him, as a kind of sneaky, mean version of myself. And we'd do stuff like, we'd throw a party in the game, and then Panswago would turn up and insult everyone and ruin it, which me and Tom found hilarious at the time. So then from that point onward, this kind of slick-haired mustachioed character, he became my go-to creator character in games like The Sims, like WWE games where you create a wrestler, any open world games where you make the guy that's running around murdering everyone. And I haven't actually made him many times in recent years, and I think that might be because I've become more led by the games in creating characters themselves. And going back to D&D, I was thinking about being introduced to role-playing outside of video games and having to really consider the character you're building and how it suits the setting. And I think that might have made me put more effort and thought into the sort of aspect of character building within video games. And now I try and make them fit. I suppose I'm making them fit what I think the game is about, which, maybe that's too presumptive. And having said all of that, remembering all of this now has made me very keen to bring Panswago back into the fold. So finally, you mentioned always choosing the engineer class, which I don't think that's actually something I would have said about you if someone had asked, what's Rob's go-to class choice in games. But now you have said it, and I'm remembering back. I'm like, oh yeah, he does always play the engineer. And of course, your reasons for enjoying engineer characters makes perfect sense. And it was also great to hear you talk about Guns of Icarus, which we got such a short spell out of it, and it was so fun. But I think the game was dying just as we discovered it, and there was just no one else playing it. But I really enjoyed it, and I know you did as well, lag notwithstanding. But yeah, when you played, you did always play the engineer, and I think another friend of ours would always pilot, and I was always the gunner, which leads me to my sort of final, often made choice. So my preferred class type in most games is the heavy weapons specialist. I always choose the biggest guy with the biggest gun and the most firepower. And after you talked about why you like to be an engineer, I sort of tried to put my finger on what it is that draws me to the heavy weapons class. And it is difficult to put your finger on. And I think historically maybe it's that my friends and my friends that I play games with, they've always leaned more towards sort of the helpful utility classes like medics and engineers and soldiers. So perhaps I was just sort of filling a gap, maybe, and now it's just become a part of me because it's been so many years that I always choose the heavy class. And I do know that sort of in games and movies, I do like the idea of that the tank character, although there's sort of one character maybe who just slowly walks into a room, just firing off thousands of rounds a minute and just unleashing these torrents of damage, where everyone's like, oh God, watch out, it's that guy again. So that might be a reason. And I did also wonder if it has anything to do with me. I'm literally sort of being quite a physically heavy person in real life for all of my life. And it sort of harks back to childhood games maybe, where I was always sort of quite slow, but if I did catch someone in a sort of game of tag or wrestling or whatever, I was very strong because I was heavy and I was hard to get away from, and that maybe that's kind of that's imprinted somewhere deep within me. But thinking back on why I might choose the heavy class, that reminded me of a story from the game Infantry, which I briefly mentioned in a couple of episodes ago. So Infantry was this really wonderfully made, well-balanced MMO sort of combat game, shooting game really. It was driven by teamwork more than anything, and you had to have a good spread of classes in your team in order to win. And the graphics are really simple. Again, it was this sort of isometric top-down view, which apparently were very popular in the 2000s. But you could only see a certain amount of the map. You played these sort of small soldiers, figures with a little aiming reticule around you, and because you could only see a certain amount of the map, you needed to have this sort of real spatial awareness and be able to move quite quickly to be good at it. And I used to play it with my friends Jack and Justin, and they always used to like playing this set of maps where 3 teams fought for control of different areas of the map, and I think the teams were like 10 to 15 people each, and then I think you had to hold it like I suppose it's like a King of the Hill type game, but in these 3 different areas. But Jack and Justin were both really good at playing utility classes that helped the team, like I think there was a squad leader that you could teleport players into the action, or there'd be a medic and be healing everyone. But I was always the heavy weapons guy, and I became famous amongst us. It was a thing we always used to joke about. I had this weapon. You could buy loads of different weapons and kit your characters out really uniquely, which is one of the appeals of the game. But I had this gun which we called the Big Green Bullet. I can't remember the real name of it, but it was this sort of super powerful energy weapon that fired off this big bouncing green ball, and it was so inaccurate and slow, but it decimated everything it touched. And while they were inside, helping the team, I would just stand outside the door to these busy rooms with these fights going on, and I would just spam the Big Green Bullet through the door, and it would just bounce around and kill everyone. So yeah, maybe that's where it all started. And occasionally on Infantry, we would do these 1 versus 1 battles between us, and their characters were always faster and had better weapons that could like stun me or slow me down. So they would almost always get the better of me. But every now and then, one of them would get caught with the Big Green Bullet and get massacred, and it was the sweetest feeling in the world. So yeah, they're my choices, buddy. Sorry I didn't go with more optional stuff. I did think of a couple, but they're not particularly interesting. Smaller things. Or maybe these are paths still again, but I always choose red if there is a colour to choose for your team. I always make fun of my friend Justin because he always chooses teal, not blue or green, teal for his teams. I think I always play a male character, which I think maybe I got it into my head that playing a female character or choosing to create one was like a pervy thing to do as a teenager. So I don't know. I don't think I've ever created a female character, which is probably something to rectify. But yeah, they're the only ones I could really think of. Interested to hear your thoughts on all of that. Hit me up.
Hey there, Panswago. What a lovely buffet of answers. Lots of different places that I can start, but I suppose I'll kick off by thinking about that question you asked about what compels us towards the good. And I think it's probably got a lot to do with the sort of zero-sum nature of mechanics in games. You either get good points or bad points. Particularly in a game like Fable, it's very clear how it's rewarding you. And I guess that doesn't leave too much grey space where most morality and ethics exist. And that contrasts, I suppose, with the way that we play D&D, and that's, I guess, because the sort of the GM, the person running the game, can pivot and change the rules of the encounter at their whim, either because it's going too smoothly or because they're interested in the direction that's been taken. And I know that's something that you enjoy about running the game that me and SB play with you, is that we always take it in a slightly different direction than you thinking. And that lets you sort of pivot and add all sorts of nuance in to what's happening. It's also true that me and SB usually oscillate wildly between the dark and the light. And I think that's probably best explained with the sort of Parnast well encounter. So I'll try and go through the beats of what was involved in that. So essentially, there were some non-player characters who were the drivers of this caravan, and one of them was sort of moaning and complaining that we'd got them into trouble, and so we then convinced that's what it was. It was in a fight they started running away because they were unarmed, and we were being attacked by goblins or some sort of the forces of nature as well. There was sort of wind blustering and blowing around, and we took against the one that ran away, and so convinced the person who was paying us to dock that guy's pay, to not pay him for the journey. And so after we'd sort of accomplished the objective of that thing and ended up in Parnast, this sort of small town where he was from, he came with his brothers trying to act as heavies to wrestle the money out of us. And we stood our ground and decided to sort of fight them and not pay. And so sort of rolled to hit them with my big hammer or whatever. And I think I might have hit a critical hit with it. So I absolutely hit one of his brothers. Just like smashed him into the ground. Because we've been used to fighting all these enemies who had armour and stuff. I was expecting like a bigger fight. Not realising that they were just like normal sort of townspeople or whatever. And so the single dice roll that I did killed this guy like 5 times over. And I'm pretty sure Sai's character, who's a dragon type character, spat loads of acid in their faces and killed 2 of the other brothers of this guy. And then you said, oh, by the way, if you want to attack them and not harm them, you could just say that you try and hit them with your fist. But you only said that after we'd slaughtered his 3 brothers. And suddenly we felt this sort of wave of like seeing ourselves from the outside and the monsters that we become. And so, and then Sai's character, I guess, was threatening to kill him, but then gave him the original money for the pay for what he did before, but like dropped it coin by coin onto his head. And it was an encounter that really made us question whether we were the good guys there. Then, obviously, this is bringing it back to the well, we stuffed the bodies into the town well and bade the guy to never speak of it again, lest we go back and kill him. Don't know that there's moral ethics in that. I guess we're just the bad guys in quite a straightforward way in that story. But it's the sort of thing I'd never decide to do that in a computer game. It would feel like this sort of scripted series of events where there were easy moral choices to make. Whereas me and Sai were lost in the moment of imagining what these characters are doing. And I guess it's partly to do with the sort of collaborative element there, that you're creating a shared dream or shared vision. If I need correcting on that, you can drop in a postscript, because I know you're an avid notes keeper. I think there's simplified zero-sum morality of video games is clear in Red Dead and the story that you told about that character who was a slaver and the moral outrage of the character that you play, which I guess skips past Jim Crow and the long shadow of slavery in the US. It's, I guess, obviously the right path for a modern AAA game to view slavery with absolute scorn and moral disgust. But I would say it's probably heavily anachronistic for the majority of characters to hold a moral, that level of moral, ethical outrage at slavery, because it's something that split the country in half. The question of slavery split the country in half, and people would have taken a longer arc to coming to the obvious modern perspective on the total outrage of that practice and all of the things that we would think about it today. And partly I think it's the right choice for a modern AAA game to take that view and to allow for the modern outrage to define that moment, because otherwise you're just giving meme generators to the modern extreme right, and there would be people that played that game to enjoy and relish in that moment, and by forcing the modern perspective on that, you're sort of taking away the opportunity for people to revel in that. Beyond anything as well, I think you made the right ethical choice by shooting that guy and watching him tumble into the fire, because it had the right comic visual, which undercuts the sort of whitewashing nature of that scene. And if in doubt, go for the thing that looks most visually pleasing. You know, I know that you took a lot longer to complete Red Dead than you could have done, because you kept ending up. You were telling me a story about how you kept on getting caught into intense shootouts in the in the first one, where you sleep in a saloon, so that's like the spawn point each time you log in. And you bought this cape, and every time it sort of swooshed as you walked down the stairs, you were just like whoop, and ducked into that slow motion mode and just shot everyone in the bar. You ended up sort of holed up in that bar, shooting everyone in town until you were out of ammunition, because who can walk past a swoosh like that and not whip out your pistol. The handbrake turn that I'm going to do now is just suddenly to drop all of that murky conversation about ethics and just talk about this fictional character of Ober Anderson and what he's like. So in my head, I guess he's this Swedish giant, so physically not too different from me, but he obviously has lived up to his full potential, so he's all muscle and brawn. I think Ober would be headstrong and intellectually certain in a way that I'm not, so I, given any opportunity, will doubt everything that I've just said. I'm ready to renege most of what I talked about in that Red Dead section, because I think there's probably nuance that I've missed over, or judgment I've passed that I should scale back on. Ober doesn't worry about that stuff. Ober says something and then he sticks with it. And he also probably has a voice like a megaphone, whereas mine's slightly nasalier and more weaselly than I'd like. I think he'd be a lot of fun at parties as well, but you probably wouldn't want to be around him 7 days a week. You want to see him for a weekend and then have a month off maybe. That's my thinking. Much like Panswago, I suppose. Great, but in the right doses. Or is it that Panswago, your evil twin that lived his life in the Coke music game, is it that he just always ruins the party and he's more like a sinister moustache-twirling baron who would be roping damsels in distress to railway lines? I'd like you to make sure you share a visual of Panswago, and if you can't, you're going to have to recreate it in some sort of creator, because I need to know the hallmarks of Panswago and keep an eye out for him. I looked up the Coke music game, and the virtual world was officially shut down on March 9th, 2010, so R.I.P. Panswago. If you'd stuck with Habbo Hotel, however, that lives on. So according to its website, Habbo has expanded to 9 online communities or hotels with users from more than 150 countries, and as of October 2020 has 316 million avatars that have been registered in the game, none of which are Panswago, so poor Panswago. They also tried to integrate NFTs as well, so we backed the wrong horse, and I will not rest or sleep until there is a NFT of Panswago on the moon. Is that what NFTs are for? Something like that. It feels like that's related. Mars, probably on Mars. Elon Musk wants Panswago on Mars. In looking at answers, I also agree that the tank or heavy gunner, that feels right to me, that's your default. Although playing Team Fortress 2 together, you always played as the spy, not the big machine gunner. But I think that's a case in itself, isn't it? I don't know. Panswago could be a spy, I imagine. But yeah, the lovely deception element of the spy was amazing, and was a weird character to learn as the first character that I played as in Team Fortress. It was definitely one that required a bit more dexterity on the number pad than I was ready for. I'm obviously Red or Dead as well. Who in their right mind would pick blue, given the two choices? And also, yeah, I had a tiny dalliance with infantry, and I think you showed me the big green bullet in that as well. Although I'm not sure that I ever saw its full effect, because when we were playing it was barely populated maps, etc. It reminded me a little bit as well of when we played Insurgency with Jack and Justin, which is the sort of hardcore version of Counter-Strike. So it's even more lent towards sort of realism, and one-shot kills with almost any weapon. And I was so mercilessly terrible at that game. But the kills that I did get were ones where there were inside levels and I could play as the class that had like a rocket launcher, and I would just basically try and get into a corridor and shoot that as soon as I could before somebody killed me. Final points, I guess, is just some corrections. The penalty shootout that I was thinking of was the 1994 Lillehammer Games in Norway, and Sweden beat Canada in the final on a shootout. So they've never had a shootout against Finland, so it's got to have been that. And also the Fable side quest that I was talking about is called The Ghost, and it involves a man named Cyril who asks the player to deliver a letter to his lover, Lady Grey, and if the player reveals Cyril's love letter to Lady Grey's fiancé instead of to Lady Grey, the fiancé commits suicide. Fiancé? Fiancé. I'm not sure how I'm supposed to be saying that. My go-to was always to say fiancé, but again, as I was saying earlier, I am instantly worried that sounds vaguely sort of xenophobic or anti-French, and so I'm backing out of all of that decision now. Thankfully, this isn't a computer game, so I haven't received any good points or bad points for it, but I feel the bad points on the inside.
I've got one final Red Dead story, which I think caps this episode nicely. I've been playing for a few hours, so I'd gone through the section where you're introduced to the game and you're with your wife, and then she's murdered, right? That's the premise of that game. I'm remembering this right? And then obviously jumps forward in time and you're then in the broader map for the first time. And then there's that first town where you're given little side quests or you can crack on with the main objective. And one of the things it introduces you to is the fast travel using the sort of horse and cart. What would you call that? Carriages? What's that called? When you get someone else to ride along in the carriage. It's like a taxi. Oh, man. I haven't even got a postscript to correct it because this is the postscript. Anyway, it introduces you to those. And I was thinking about this story because of what we were saying about video games not necessarily giving you the space to explain or justify your actions. You can only communicate to the game using the vocabulary of mechanics it gives you. And so I wanted to get in that coach. As we've been talking about, we want to be the head boys. We want to be the good prefect boys. And so, you know, I was just trying to be as good a character as I possibly could the whole time. And I wanted to fast travel to the next thing. So I tried to climb on board the carriage. It was the first time I'd done it. And I got in the wrong side and I threw the driver out. And so that was instantly read as a bad thing. And he started running away being like, oh, he's going to kill me. And I was desperately chasing him down, being like, no. I just got in the wrong side. But the game doesn't know that. And so I sort of chased him, and one of the things you can do in Red Dead is you can lasso people and then tie them up. So I managed to like chase him down and get this rope round him. But I'd done that. Just as I'd done that, grabbed him down, just finished hog tying him up, and just on the horizon there's this person walking down the road, and they're like, there's a guy over there tying someone up. And then they start yelling and running. So I then start chasing them down. And they're a fair distance. I could easily just sort of gun them down. But I don't want to do that because that's just going to make things worse. So I like nick a horse. Someone sees me steal the horse. Suddenly, like, I'm the worst guy in town. And there's a whole posse after me. And I go through this series of events, eventually sort of killing people, and then trying to cover them up. All just trying to, like, lose the heat. Because I think what you have to do at some point is you just have to go and pay your like bounty for all the crimes you've committed, all the crimes that people have seen you commit. And I was just like desperately not wanting to reload the save, but also had this terrible rap sheet of awful murders that I'd committed. And I can't place what the sort of film reference is for it, but I just had this vision of myself, you know, hog-tying someone up, just saying like, I'm a nice guy! I'm a nice guy!
Memory complete. Uploading memory.
Thanks for listening to The Memory Game. If you would like to share a gaming memory with us, ask us a question or send us your thoughts, you can contact us at memorygamepod@gmail.com or on Instagram @memorygamepod.